When I think about the end of humanity, which feels more imminent every time I read the news, but I already digress, I think about raiders fighting for basic resources, mutated animals running amok, and zombies eating the faces off of the dumb people who are somehow slower than them. You know, basic stuff. What I don't generally think about is radio broadcasts from Mars that play thumping electronic music laced with the sound of babies giggling and unironically referred to as toddler pop. Yet this is the world The Cub, a new platformer from Demagogue Studio, presents us with in its first 15 minutes, and personally, I was all aboard the weird post-human wasteland train. Before humanity dies out though, if you can spare a minute to check out our Patreon at patreon.com/idreamofindiegames, we'd be thrilled to have you support our continued coverage of the indie gaming scene while getting cool perks like exclusive live streams, access to our Discord community, and free games depending on your membership tier. The fate of humanity literally depends on it. Okay, maybe not. Sometimes I just want to be dramatic. While The Cub opens up with a bit of weirdness in all the right places, I would say it's more peppered throughout its runtime and less the main flavor of the dish, so to speak. The Cub takes place after what it calls the Great Ecological Catastrophe, after which the richest of the rich fly off to Mars since they need a new planet to destroy, and leave everyone else behind to fight for the precious few resources left. Our protagonist is a small but precocious child, only known as the game's namesake, the Cub, who tells us of their separation from their mother and subsequent dash into the nearby woods where they're raised by wolves in the wild. The story begins as the Cub finds the body of an explorer from Mars that's come back to Earth to understand what's happened in the time since the rich fled. Upon taking his helmet, our Cub gets introduced to arguably the most interesting aspect of the game, which is radio nostalgia, a live broadcast coming at you from Mars itself and the background to the gameplay from that moment forward. Some of you may find the stylings of this game relatively familiar, as it seemingly takes place in the same world as Golf Club Nostalgia, or Golf Club Wasteland as it was formerly known prior to some legal issues, one of Demagogue Studios' prior releases. It's one I never personally played, so can't comment on The Cub as a companion piece to it, but worth mentioning for those who enjoyed that title. Going back to radio nostalgia though, while it is in no way a game mechanic, as nothing about it is interactive at all, rather it's more of a storytelling device, and one that I found especially captivating for a game whose story and world are competent but by the numbers. Not only did radio nostalgia introduce me to infant EDM, as I alluded to in my opening, but it's a genuinely compelling and well-acted radio show that serves as a great, if unusual, background to the game's platforming. On paper it sounds like an idea that wouldn't really work. Thumping electronic music, smooth jazz, or rap doesn't exactly mesh with the theme of running through a forest being chased by Martian humans, but in execution, radio nostalgia feels like a window into life on Mars, complete with ramblings on Martian daily life, like the moment our host bemoans that he needs to keep reminding his fellow Martians not to open the window just to get some fresh air. It doesn't work like that. Some things never change, I guess. Collectibles littered throughout the world are also charming and give a bit of context into what happened, though perhaps not enough to generate any real intrigue. You'll be collecting things like cheesy clips of television broadcasts, loud soda burps whenever you find a vending machine, or newspaper clippings with conveniently topical headlines. While the game's tone is clearly a bit on the playful side as opposed to a super serious examination of a feral child growing up in the end times, there are many instances where the Cub tries to take a swing at capitalism and only commits about a quarter of the way, finding a magazine collectible that laments at the awful things that CEO Jeff Bozo has been doing, or passing former buildings of companies like Fakebook or Wallfart is too low effort to ever really be truly funny and too cheeky to really make much of a point. It's all just kinda there. As on the nose as the Cub can be thematically, even the more ridiculous aspects of the radio show have a lot of charm, and the game ended in an interesting way, albeit probably far sooner than most of you will be expecting. Playing the Cub from beginning to end, considering factors like the handful of platforming sequences I had to repeat up to a dozen times or so, took me just a smidge over 2.5 hours, barely exceeding the length of the average Marvel movie. I respect it for not outstaying its welcome in one sense, but felt like it ran out of ideas a bit too quickly all the same. I haven't talked much at all about the platforming for a game that's primarily a platformer, so let's get into that. Your Cub has a pretty simple moveset that includes a slide, dash, double jump, and the ability to hang from ledges or swing from poles or vines, and in that sense is quite an agile little rascal, and manages to feel pretty good to control a vast majority of the time. Some of the game's chase sequences have you swinging from vines, dodging mines, and jumping off ledges in such quick succession that it certainly got my heart racing, especially in areas where timing was key. I did have a handful of frustrating moments all the same though. While the platforming mostly feels responsive, occasionally occasional collision detection issues may have you missing that branch you swore you should have grabbed, or hitting an invisible wall while not jumping quite high enough over a car. These are frustrations that could usually be resolved in a handful of tries, but that periodic level of jank, combined with many sequences' reliance on trial and error, veered toward being annoying at times. I felt similarly about the stealth sequences, which were as basic as could possibly be, requiring you to hide behind obstacles while an enemy slowly patrolled the area and would shoot you with a tranquilizer dart if caught. At the very least, these sequences are pretty easy and not numerous enough to meaningfully detract from the rest of the experience. Chase sequences fared a lot better for the most part. While they had their own issues with trial and error at times, occasionally requiring such a small margin of error that a controller or two is bound to be slammed by someone, most of them felt well designed and created a good flow, even if obstacles and traversal paths tended to feel a bit familiar between levels. So what we ultimately have is a very competent but fairly unambitious platformer, partially propped up by a great visual aesthetic and interesting music. While I've already talked about the radio plenty, the visuals deserve some recognition without a doubt. Styled to look similar to Disney movies from the 90s, our cub is animated beautifully, and has lots of charming little moves to add some personality to the proceedings. Seeing them get bored and sit on their helmet when you don't move, or do a little dance when they stumble upon an abandoned but still thumping nightclub, always brought a smile to my face and was the sort of nice touch that appreciably helps me like the character more. Environments look great too, embracing an eclectic color palette by post-apocalyptic standards, and not being afraid to dabble in some strange magical realism to present a world that's captivating but reasonably believable, at least by 90s Disney movie standards. Settings are pretty bare bones as you'd expect from a game like this, but have some mild accessibility wins like the ability to remap controls and show larger than normal subtitles if need be. The only real graphical toggle available besides resolution was what the game calls cinematic mode. From what I could tell, all this really allowed was for you to play the game from a bit more of a zoomed out perspective with black bars on the top and bottom of the screen, whereas toggling it off would zoom in a little too much for my personal liking for a platformer of this nature. It's nice to have the option there for those who are driven crazy by black bars bookending the screen, but cinematic mode was my personal preference the whole way through. The game also runs great on the Steam Deck and will be right at home there for many of you, though I do recommend headphones to properly enjoy radio nostalgia the way it's meant to be enjoyed. There is not a lot more to say about the Cub. It's a slightly above average platformer, elevated by a really cool presentation, but ending a good bit too soon by most platformer standards and having a few frustrating but minor speed bumps along the way. So it's not without its caveats, but fans of the genre are likely to have a good time while it lasts. I'm awarding the Cub with our bronze genie lamp of approval.
Yeah!